All right, guys, welcome to Question of Strength. Basically, my corner of the web where I talk about stuff that interests me, stuff I find out, and also obviously answer your questions. I personally believe that the part where I answer your questions is the most valuable portion of this show because it always basically gear the material I'm going to be covering to your own needs. Obviously, the more questions you have, the more interesting this is going to get, and obviously, the more you'll get out of it. I already noticed that there are several questions pre-posted in the chat room section of this YouTube video, so don't hesitate to post any questions related to training, nutrition, supplementation, lifestyle in that chat room. I'll get to it, or at least we'll try to get in as many questions as possible because, as you know, I tend to talk a lot when answering questions. That's probably because of the adrenaline. All right. Before we get to your questions, one topic I want to cover. In past videos, I mentioned that when it comes to a calorie deficit with the aim of losing body fat, not all caloric deficits are the same, meaning that you could have two deficits of 500 or 1,000 calories, even though those two deficits are of the same magnitude, let's say 500. uh, the way you're creating that deficit matters when it comes to how sustainable the fat loss is, how you feel during the process, and so on and so forth. So, for example, and I mentioned a study that was conducted comparing a higher food reduction versus a lower food reduction, but an increase in physical activity to create the same overall deficit. And what they found was that the more you reduce food intake, keep in mind that the whole deficit was the same, also evidenced by the fact that they lost the same amount of weight on average. The more food was reduced after a few months, the more metabolic adaptations you had. Metabolic adaptations mean that your body is trying to protect itself by reducing how much fuel it uses on a daily basis to try to reduce the because it sees the food shortage as something that is dangerous for survival. So it will decrease metabolic rate. It will also decrease body temperature, which would also decrease caloric expenditure, energy expenditure, and also it will lead to what we call behavioral changes or behavioral modification. Essentially, you become lazier, you instinctively move less or less active or fidget less so that you reduce calorie expenditure even more to try to reduce that deficit. So obviously, the more you can maintain a high amount of food while still losing roughly 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week, the better off you are. You're going to have less of those metabolic adaptations, or they will be delayed. You will have less behavioral changes. You will also feel better. You won't have the same mood swings, sleep issues, libido drop as you would if you had that very large food reduction. Okay. However, one thing I want to point out, and that's kind of the topic for today, and I actually learned this myself the hard way because me being me, I'm someone who tends to be excessive in everything I'm doing. That increase in energy expenditure, so basically moving more to create a deficit, it's also not the same depending on what kind of activity you are using to create that increase in energy expenditure to create a deficit. For example, while you can burn more calories by increasing the volume of training you're doing, it might actually backfire in the long run. Okay, first let's cover strength training or resistance training or hypertrophy training and so on and so forth. Even though like calorie expenditure will obviously vary depending on the exercises you're doing, you will obviously burn more calories doing a squat than doing a wrist curl or something like that, right? So, but on average, I mean, if you look at the average workout, a caloric expenditure of roughly 1 calorie per repetition performed is a pretty good average. At least you get a decent idea of how much calories you are burning in your workout. So certainly you can increase your caloric expenditure by doing more volume, but it's not that much. For example, if you're doing a German volume training, 10 sets of 10 reps, it's going to be something like 100, 150 calories being burned. Now, if you were to double that volume, 20 sets of 10 reps, that would still come up to only like 200 to 300 calories. So it's not that much more, especially considering the amount of fatigue that the higher volume of work would create, and also that it might actually make the rest of the workout less effective because of central fatigue. Okay, and that's the difference we must make between training and background physical activity or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Because typically training uh, obviously has the benefit of causing adaptations. If you do resistance training to increase muscle mass, your adaptation is getting bigger muscles, or at least maintaining muscle while you're losing fat, but certainly trying to build muscle. If you do strength training, even with some hypertrophy training, another benefit or adaptation is getting stronger, both by making your muscles stronger and by developing your system's capacity to use those muscles to produce force. If you're doing hard conditioning like metcons, like intervals, like CrossFit WODs, you will gain an increase in anaerobic capacity, the capacity to maintain or to perform a large amount of work in that time anaerobic time frame, which is something like 3, maybe up to 5 minutes in some people. So that obviously is an adaptation and a benefit. If you're training with endurance training to increase, you will get an adaptation that is an increase in VO2 max, also an improvement in how you are using and transporting fat for fuel, improvement in health and stuff like that. But the point is that anything that will be done at an intensity high enough to trigger adaptations or changes in your body or in your capacities also increases the need for recovery period. Now, the thing is that not all methods will fatigue all the systems equally. There's like, even though we often talk about systemic fatigue, that doesn't really exist because your system, your body, or systematic, the whole body, it's really, well, yes, you can have fatigue in all those systems at the same time, but they are still separate events. So, for example, if you're doing resistance training, you will get more muscle fatigue, peripheral muscle fatigue. You will get some central fatigue. Um, if you're doing endurance capacity, the fatigue will hit the muscles less, but can fatigue the energy production system, can also deplete energy reserves. If you're doing plyometrics, you're going to get more central nervous system fatigue, stuff like that. Okay, but the point is that anything done at a level sufficient to lead to adaptation, plus gains or changes, will increase your need to recover in some regard. And the point is that if you are using mostly training to increase your daily energy expenditure, then you run the risk of that backfiring because by being more tired, by being more fatigued, you will probably, voluntarily or not, decrease the amount of moving you do during the rest of the day. You might need to nap more. You might spend more time on the couch because you're just too tired to do your chores. You might subconsciously stop fidgeting because you're trying to save energy. Maybe you don't go out and play with the kids because you're too tired. The point is that it's kind of like robbing Peter to dress Paul. Uh, you might burn like 200 calories more by training more, but that might actually lead to a decrease in overall physical activity or the same 200 calories or even more. Okay. And that can be problematic because those, I want to say habits, those comportamental changes or behavioral changes might stick with you. So once you stop training as much, you might have taken the habit of moving less, and that will decrease overall energy expenditure, making fat loss a lot harder. Okay. So that's something you need to consider. Like, yes, I'm all for training a lot, provided you recover, but understand that using more training just for the sake of spending more calories might backfire and actually lead to less overall calories being burned for the whole day, okay, the whole week, and so on and so forth. As much as possible, you want to try to increase your energy expenditure to physical activity that is non-stressful to your body, which does not require extended recovery periods, like walking, doing chores, and so on and so forth. All right, that's something I think that is important because all of us who love training, actually, and especially my crowd, because my crowd tends to have the same kind of passion as I do, which is they love everything training. So I want to do some hypertrophy, I want to do some strength, I want to do power, I want to do conditioning, I want to do sports practices, and that can very easily build up to an excessive workload. I actually had to force myself to stick to one type of training per day because on some days I was having as many as 3 sessions, and at first, I felt great because of the adrenaline, but it started slowly to build up, and I noticed that I was becoming lazier and just would forsake more, walking more, and stuff like that. All right. So with that being said, let's get to your question. Already seeing a lot of questions, but don't hesitate to post even more. I'm going to try to cover as many as possible. All right. First question by Bob: is it okay to mix my creatine in my morning coffee? I've heard that any amount of caffeine or heat can reduce the effect. Would decaf solve the potential problem, or is heat the issue? Okay, that's actually a fairly complex topic that I don't think has been fully elucidated. Okay, because there were several studies, in fact, some as recent as 2 years ago, that found that combining caffeine with creatine lowered the benefit of creatine. In reality, what I suspect is going on is that both caffeine and creatine increase performance in strength, in recovery capacity between sets, and in work capacity. What could be happening is that it doesn't really blunt the effect of creatine, but that it's not a 1 plus 1 equals 2 equation or 1 plus 1 equals 3 equation, much less. So it's more like you don't get the like real addition of you get X amount of benefits from caffeine and X amount from creatine, you add it up, and it's like the total of both. In reality, you get like maybe like one and a half the benefit of taking, for example, you let's say with caffeine, you get a benefit of one, with creatine, you get a benefit of one, you don't get a benefit of two, you get like 1.5. So the reason why it made creatine less effective. I don't think that's really what's happening, although I'm still hoping because the science is equivocal. It's not set in stone on that topic. What could be happening is that if you take both at the same time, it might be a matter of timing. So, for example, typically people will take caffeine in the form of supplement prior to workout as a workout supplement, and they would add creatine with it because they figure, well, I'm going to put all the stuff that is required for my workout in there. What could be happening is that caffeine will hit you really fast, but creatine still needs to be absorbed and shuttled to the muscle and stored in the muscle tissue to be effective at being used for energy. So maybe by forcing yourself to take it with your pre-workout supplement in some cases, it just doesn't have time to be stored in the muscle and thus be used for energy. And that make the workout performance not improve significantly because of creatine. So that might be a timing issue. There's also the fact that that caffeine tends to cause dehydration. Creatine is stored in the muscle along with three water molecules. So you need water to store creatine efficiently. So if you are someone who doesn't drink a lot and who's already like partially dehydrated most of the time, you take in caffeine, you get dehydrated more, it could decrease your capacity to store creatine. Or if you store it, you just cause further dehydration by sending water in the muscles rather than being available in the other tissues of the body. If that makes sense. Finally, the last point is that both caffeine and creatine by their own can cause stress on the digestive system. So combining both could actually make it harder to absorb those nutrients. So again, that will be more a matter of timing than the actual inhibition performance. As far as EAT degrading creatine, the theory is that, well, EAT will denature creatine and will break it down into creatinine. The thing is, when they look at the heat requirement for that to happen, it's like something like 290 degrees Celsius. So it's really not going to happen. There's no way you're going to be able to drink coffee that hot without melting your face. So I would not worry about that. I mean, there were studies showing that even when creatine when it was left in very hot temperature, even for weeks and months, there was very little degradation into creatine. So it would not be an issue. So to me, it's more a matter of the timing. So if you're using the creatine in a pre-workout format, and you take it before the workout, and you just think I'm going to have creatine just before my workout, there's a good chance it might not get stored yet. Creatine is not a supplement that is really what I would call a pre-workout supplement. Yes, it increases performance, potentially increases performance, but it's something just like carbohydrates that need to be stored in the muscles so that it can be used for fuel production in your workout. And that would require some time, again, depending on the amount of food in your stomach, your digestive process, and so on and so forth. So it's really not something you want to take immediately before the workout. There's really no need to, because once creatine has been stored in the muscle, it's going to stay there until you use it. And unless you're performing very intense and hard muscle contraction, you're not going to be using that creatine, because the phosphagen are an energy system that is used for very, very intense and short contraction. So it's probably only your workout or maybe like moving furniture that will require you to use those phosphagens and the creatine. So you could, for example, if you're training at, let's say, 2 p.m. and you take your creatine in the morning, well, it's still going to be loaded in the muscle, and it's probably going to be more effective than trying to take it like 10, 15 minutes before your workout. You certainly need to take it at least 30 minutes before the workout, and probably more if you're not on an empty stomach. So as far as your morning coffee, I would not worry about it unless you're training like immediately afterwards. Hi, coach. Last week, you went into more detail on the max effective reps, but the research and social media still talk about total weekly volume in sets. We know how many effective reps per muscle per week, but we don't. Again, it's just not something that at the moment can be objectively and precisely measured. Uh, like some studies do make the effort of giving the participant an effort level recommendation. For example, you're going to read studies saying that the subject did 10 repetitions per set with 2 reps in reserve. Some newer studies do that. But the point is, how are they measuring how many reps in reserve? Are they just relying on the subject's interpretation of how many or estimation of how many reps they have in reserve? Because if that's the case, I showed last week that most people are extremely bad at evaluating how many reps they have in reserve, especially when you're doing like 10 reps or more. The study I quoted basically asked subjects to predict or to select the weight they could use for a hard set of 10 reps. And when they had to perform that set under supervision and tasked to go to failure, they all got between 16 and 19 reps, even though they predicted that that would be a very good weight for 10 reps. So the fact is that most people grossly underestimate how many reps they have in reserve. Now, are you using the subjective interpretation or analysis of the researcher, just looking at someone and say, okay, yeah, you had 2 reps in reserve. Okay. At the moment, it's very hard to predict how many reps you have in reserve. The only way would be to actually test someone's RM. So let's say we will be using 120 pounds. Uh, so let's use 420 pounds and have the subject go to failure. Let's say they get 10 reps. If you want them to stop 2 reps short of failure, you're going to use that same way for 8 reps. That would be like the one way to be decently close to predicting the proper reps in reserve. Uh, the other one would be to use velocity, drop in velocity. So using an encoder that measure barbell speed or machine speed or lifting speed. And the theory is that if you push as hard as you can, Once the speed drops down to a certain speed level, I don't remember exactly what it is, something like 0.3 meter per second, I think, those reps start to be effective reps because it's slow enough to have maximum tension. The point is, the fact is that most people who train for hypertrophy don't try to kill the weight on every reps, and so first, they probably going slower on purpose. So you might actually not notice the drop in speed. They might actually be going at 0.3 meter per second right from the start, but these still won't be effective reps because the level of effort required is low. So the point is that it's very, very hard to objectively and precisely measure how many reps in reserve someone has. So from that point on, impossible to evaluate how many effective reps you have in a workout. So for example, let's say you are just one rep off, okay? Instead of being two reps short of failure, you're three reps short of failure, right? And you do 15 sets, you're still 15 reps off in your prediction. So it's impossible. Furthermore, and as I mentioned last week, effective reps is just a theory. It's a very, very intellectually elegant theory. It would explain a lot, but it's still a theory, and it might be proven wrong in 5 to 10 years. Just like muscle damage was once thought as the main driver of hypertrophy, and more recent studies have shown that it is not the case. So it does sound smart. People like that interpretation on social media because it makes things simple. But in reality, it's just a theory. But besides that, even if it was proven and 100% accurate, it's still at the moment impossible to truly measure how many effective reps someone is doing. Thus, it becomes very hard to have a study evaluating how much volume you need in terms of effective reps. And even if it were possible, you still have the same issue as you have with most current literature on lifting volume. And that issue is that it's done, the subject are mostly beginner lifters in those studies. Even the studies reporting, well, the subject have 5 years on average of lifting experience. Sure, but in my mind, they're still beginners. To me, a beginner is not how long you've been hitting the gym. It's how much progress you've made in strength gains, in size gains. Because if you, for example, let's say you've been training for 5 years, but you have not gained any muscle and you haven't gained any strength, to me, you never trained hard enough to stimulate adaptation or growth. Therefore, your body is still at the beginner level. Okay. So let me ask you this, and I've mentioned this many times in the past. You guys are passionate about lifting. They're passionate about training. You're passionate about your training. You want to try different things out. You want to see what works, what doesn't work. You want to learn more. You want to experience more. Well, is someone like you, who's not a beginner, okay, is that person likely to stop their own training and to go for 10 weeks to a program that would not change? Normally, it's not paradise. It's like 10 weeks, the same program, or 10 weeks of a very, very, very basic training program. Are you willing to stop your training, stop your experimentation, stop your progression just to go do that 10 weeks of beginner-ish training? 99% of the experienced lifters or those who are no longer beginners will say hell no. Okay. So you still have the same issue that those who actually participate in those studies are physiologically beginners to weight training. And the beginner body will respond differently to training. They will probably need more volume to stimulate those gains because it's just harder for them to get into those money reps because of uh, earlier neurological limitation. All right. What are your favorite daily supplements for longevity, muscle and performance, and recovery sleep? Uh, well, let's address muscle and performance first because it's probably the easiest one. To me, most supplements that work, that do something for improving muscle growth or performance, are supplements that allow you to either train harder, train more at the same level, or recover faster from your training. Okay, which actually addresses the recovery and sleep equation too, right? Or for example, I mentioned creatine earlier. Some studies actually report that creatine does not increase muscle growth, doesn't increase strength, and other studies are very clear that it does. In my experience, it's simply because what creatine does, as far as like hypertrophy and strength are concerned, is that it allows you to maintain a high level of effort for a few more seconds, maybe get one or two more reps at an even load. But those two added reps are very hard reps. And if you don't do them, you actually don't get much from the supplement because, well, you don't, if you do the same number of reps at the same rate as you did before creatine, then the stimulus is not stronger than it was. Creatine allows you to impose a stronger stimulus by training harder. But if you don't do it, it won't work. It will give you some water weight, which will be dropped soon after cessation. So what you're looking for is the supplement to be able to train harder in those intense zones, like 3 to 8 reps ish. So that would be one example. And if you look at something like one of my favorites, Surge Workout Fuel gives the muscles what it needs to be able to sustain a bit more training volume while still being able to recover physiologically. So, for example, it gives you highly branched cyclic dextrin, which is a form of carbohydrates that will be very easily absorbed by the muscle but does not cause an insulin spike. Why is that important? Because during your workout, if you have an insulin spike and you are also burning lots of glucose for fuel, you run the risk of dropping into hypoglycemia. In fact, they compared highly branched cyclic dextrin with glucose supplements or regular fast carbs, and uh, highly branched cyclic dextrin actually increase work capacity or the amount of volume, like swimming to fatigue level. It increased it by a lot. Whereas the glucose or the fast carbs actually decreased the amount of high intensity work that was performed. The theory is that the insulin spike, which would decrease blood sugar level, combined with using lots of glucose for fuel, led to an hypoglycemic state, which would obviously decrease performance and could actually lead to a rebound cortisol release. Okay? I really like highly branched cyclic dextrin in Surge Workout Fuel, which also has the electrolytes required to favor muscle contraction. Electrolytes are underestimated when it comes to workout performance because, well, if you lack electrolytes, well, the whole muscle contraction, muscle relaxation process or neurological transmission just doesn't work optimally. So it's very important. It also has leucine. When taken pre-workout, leucine will increase mTOR activation, which will lead to greater protein synthesis from that workout. Okay, it's not magic, but it allows you to do more work, recover faster, and also trigger a bit more hypertrophy to protein synthesis. Um, as far as for performance sake, I personally like nootropic agents. I love like brain candy has always been one of my favorite. Even before that, I remember when I was still competing in Olympic lifting. That was probably in like 1999, and Biotest had just come out with Power Drive, and I was like all giddy because I was like Charles Poliquin got me some, and it really helped my Olympic lifting performance. I strongly believe I strongly hate. I love stimulants, but I hate them because they always backfire. But I do love nootropics, like supplements that increase neurological capacity, tyrosine, like other cool stuff that you find in either Power Drive or Brain Candy. Brain Candy being my favorite. So I like that, but again, that just puts you in a better mindset. Also increases neurological performance, which allows you to train harder. But if you don't train harder, then you don't get the benefit from the supplement. As far as recovery and sleep, my personal favorites are good old magnesium and glycine. Glycine, um, glycine, I'm super happy with the more recent scientific studies coming out showing that glycine has many benefits because I've been using glycine for probably 20 years, and the science is just catching up. Now, glycine is a neurological inhibitor. It's an amino acid, but it actually calms the brain down, which can be very useful if you have a hard time coming down after a stressful day, which will calm your brain down, facilitating entering that rest and recover mode. You can also take it after a workout if you are killing yourself in the gym and you want to calm your brain down, not to be overhyped up, which would impair recovery. But I like to use it also afterwards, after a workout. And when you take it after a workout, just like leucine, it has a very strong mTOR activating effect. If you increase mTOR more, you get more protein synthesis from the workout, you get more muscle building. It also increases serotonin level, which would further facilitate recovery. So I really like it. As far as magnesium is concerned, magnesium will decrease the impact of adrenaline. So it calms you down. It dislodges the adrenaline from its receptors. So taking it either after a workout or in the evening to calm yourself down, it is very good in my opinion. Like you can have the Zima, for example, in the evening, which would be great because athletes are typically depleted in magnesium and zinc. So that would increase many other bodily processes that are involved in energy production and recovery workout and hormonal balance. But you can also play with some specific forms of magnesium. Now, you have many different types of magnesium, like magnesium glycinate, magnesium biglycinate, magnesium taurate, magnesium threonate, and so on and so forth. The magnesium is the same. It's just that the magnesium is attached to an amino acid. And once that amino acid is cleaved off, you still are remaining with the exact same magnesium molecule. But the molecule itself, the amino acid, can have physiological effect. For example, magnesium glycinate is magnesium and glycine. So once the glycine is cleaved up, it's still in the body and can do its neurological inhibiting effect. Okay. So I like, for example, magnesium taurate after a workout. Taurine will essentially act as a neurological equalizer. It rebalances your neurotransmitter. If you're too amped up, it will calm you down. If your nervous system is too down, it will bring it up. Okay, so it balances you. It's also great at reducing cramping from neurological overstimulation. If you want to sleep better at night, I would go with either magnesium biglycinate or magnesium treonate. Typically, I go with treonate because I'm already adding glycine, so there's no reason to add glycine in the form of magnesium. Hmm. Does muscle memory works quicker in the surplus? Absolutely. Muscle memory is still hypertrophy. The reason why there is such a thing as muscle memory, which basically means that the muscle you once had but lost through detraining can be regained faster than how long you needed to build it in the first place. And the reason for that is that there are many adaptations at the cellular level that are maintained even once the muscle cell atrophies as atrophy. For example, what is called the nuclear domain. All of the essentially the structure that sustains the muscle cell and allows it to like be bigger, it's maintained even after detraining. So because that is already there, it doesn't need to be built up, so it speeds up the whole process. But you still need to build the protein structure of the muscle. You still need to add amino acids to the muscle. You still need to trigger the anabolic engine to build that muscle. So it still basically respond to the same rules as the rules that influence how much muscle you could build in the first time. It's just going to be a faster process because you don't have to rebuild the whole thing. So when you are in a calorie surplus, most anabolic mechanisms are enhanced. Food is anabolic, especially protein and carbohydrates, because not only do they provide the raw material to build the muscle and the energy to do so, they also increase several physiological processes. For example, both protein, or at least several amino acids like leucine and glycine, for example, will increase mTOR activation, which triggers protein synthesis or muscle building. You will also have, for example, carbohydrates will increase insulin, which is both anabolic and anti-catabolic. It will also increase IGF-1 level, which is highly anabolic, and it will decrease cortisol, which is catabolic. So if you are consuming more nutrients, you do speed up the muscle building process. Of course, there's a limit to how much can influence it. Just because, let's say that going from 2,000 to 3,000 calories will speed up the muscle growth process, doesn't mean that going up to 6,000 will speed it even more. You'll just end up gaining water and fat. But yes, if you're in a surplus, you will be more anabolic, so the protein synthesis part of adding muscle tissue will be enhanced, so you will be regaining that muscle faster because you still need to build tissue. You just have imagine that it's like you're still trying to build a. Let's say you have a house, okay, and it's to when you first built the house, you had to arrange the terrain. so that it can be level, so that it can be easier to build a house. You also like put up the utilities, like the electricity, the water pipe, and stuff like that. Let's say that your house get into a tornado. Well, the whole terrain is still there. You still have the water pipes. You still have, God forbid, the electricity settings. So you just need to rebuild the house, but you still have to build the house. So just because a lot of what is needed to have more muscle is already there, doesn't mean that you don't have to build muscle to protein synthesis. All right. Upright row is said to be very bad for the shoulders by Athlete X. I wouldn't put too much faith into what Athlete X says, even though he's very popular on social media because he's one of the original influencers. He's said a lot of crazy, inaccurate crap over the years. Like, for example, the guy, it probably is famous for saying that pretty much everything will decrease your gain. Like, don't do cardio; it's going to kill your gain. Don't whatever. Okay, anyway, it is not very highly ranked in my evaluation of worthwhile training and nutrition advice. He's the perfect case of someone who has good genetics and just is super lean and has been there forever. So he has like that working for him, but I don't really like his content. Anyway, is snatch with high pole any different from a mechanical point of view? It's extremely different. It's not even similar. Just because the bar travels from one point to the other doesn't mean that both is for the same. It's like saying that football and rugby are the same sport because they still use the same kind of balls, right? That doesn't work like that. First, upright row, unless you have already like a shoulder impingement syndrome or shoulder mobility issues, it's not going to cause problems. I mean, I've personally, and my friend Paul Carter wrote stuff about this. We both never saw anybody get injured with upright rows ever. Okay, ever. Now, some people who already have shoulder issues, especially in the shoulder impingement realm, might feel pain while doing upright row, but it will not cause it if you don't have it. Okay, so it's not very bad for the shoulder. It's bad for the shoulders if you have bad shoulder, right? Is snatch grip type hold different? Absolutely, because snatch grip type hold doesn't use the arms or even the shoulders to get the barbell up. If you're using mostly arm pull and shoulder pull to the snatch grip high pull, you are not doing it properly and you might get injured. Okay, a snatch grip high pull uses the legs and the hips and the traps create a strong momentum from the hips so that the barbell actually has momentum to travel on its own. Like literally, if I'm doing a snatch grip high pull, once I explode it from the hips, I could release the bar and it would still go up to roughly sternum level. Okay, the arms are bending in the snatch grip high pull not because you're pulling with your arms, because they have to bend, otherwise they will stop the bar. The bar is moving up, so if you don't bend, it will stop the bar from moving. Now you will get some arm activation at the top, mostly to direct the bar. But if you're pulling with your arms, you are not doing the exercise properly. It's, I would say like 95% legs, calves, hips, traps, no arms, no arms. The moment you pull with your arms, you might get injured, not because of the shoulder, but because you will create inflammation in the bicep tendon, which attaches in the shoulder knot. But it's not remotely the same. It's like, well, is a power clean and a reverse curl the same? No, it's not. You are using your legs and your body to create momentum, imparting momentum to the bar so that you don't have to pull with your arms. I mean, look at Olympic weightlifters, except for the Chinese lifters who are jacked out of their minds. 90% of the weightlifters don't have much, if any, upper body muscle. They have no arms, they have pretty average shoulders. So if the high pull and by extension the snatch and the clean were great at building or involving that, they would be jacked there, but they're not. It's really not even remotely close to being the same as a upright row. It's like not even in the same category. Training high effort, low volume. If I want to make 4 effective sets in the week for a muscle, which is low, is it better to be on one day or divided in different days? For that low of a volume, which is like literally the lowest point I would even consider using for a muscle, it's very freaking low. Okay, very freaking low. Some people might be able to get maximum growth from that, but not many. Okay, most people will need more than that. Anyway, so based on your question, and again, and I'm not telling you that's what you're doing, but there seems to be a pattern in on social media, on the younger lifters. They are all looking for they are trying to find reason or justification to train less. Okay, and it can either be from like the effort-based standpoint, well, I'm looking for reason to do less sets, or it can even be from the volume aspect. I'm trying to look for a reason not to push my sets hard. But for some reason, we have more and more and more people who are just looking for logical reason not to train hard or not to train. Okay, and I'm not saying it's you, but to me, that's something that really annoys me with the strength training or bodybuilding uh, category. Okay, so certainly, if you go with max effort, you're going to failure. You will need less sets, and you can't do as many sets. But you should still not try to look for what's the least amount of volume you could be doing. Okay, that's just a wrong mindset. So 4 work sets for a muscle is extremely low. It's very low. It's the lowest I would consider, and most of the time I would do more. I would do that probably only for muscles that are indirectly stimulated by other exercises. For example, if you're training for the triceps, you might 4 sets might be fine because you're doing pressing work for chest, pressing work for shoulders, so the triceps are already getting some work. But 4 sets for a muscle, in my opinion, and that's my opinion, that's my experience, it's not going to be enough for most to grow at a very fast rate. Okay, is it better to do it on one day or divide them? It's better at that lower volume to do them on the same day because I believe that you still need to reach a stimulus threshold to stimulate growth. So, for example, yeah, you might have like 4 total sets, but 2 sets in a workout, even if they're a hard set, is probably not going to be like very effective. You won't reach the threshold. So there's a threshold you need to reach to trigger the adaptation processes. Otherwise, like you would grow muscle just from doing like 1 set a month. That doesn't work like that. So to me, there's a certain amount of volume, even at a very high level effort level, that you need in a workout to stimulate growth. And 2 sets would just not do it, in my experience and opinion. How are you measuring visceral fat for the normal non-competition person? Is this waste to other body measure? Yeah, kind of. But again, that's almost impossible to measure because, well, again, visceral fat is by definition internal. So you can actually can't measure it unless you're using like DEXA or uh, another type of scan. Okay, you can do it by caliper and even like the tape measure. The problem is, I'm going to use myself as an example. Okay, I have a very thick waist because I have a long torso, so I did lots and lots and lots of heavy lifting in my time. Also, did lots and lots and lots of abdominal work. The reason is when you have a long torso, core is normally your weak link. It is in most lifts. And I was before being more into bodybuilding. I was a football player, then I was an Olympic weightlifter, then trained for strength. So to me, training my abdominals, my obliques, my lower back was always a requirement to do good on the big basic lifts. Furthermore, the big basic lift like a squat or a deadlift for me really work that core hard because of my lever. It's such a long lever that it has to work very extra hard to stabilize and be able to lift heavy weights. So because of that, like right now, like I have literally like an 8 packs and veins on my obliques, and I have like 35 inches waist, like a very thick waist, but there is no fat there. So if you were to use only tape measurement at my height, like 35 inches waist is actually a large waist. And you would conclude what you have lots of visceral fat, which is not the case. Okay, muscle mass can actually hurt that. So there's really no real way of measuring visceral fat except using various types of scans. Work out 5 days a week, work a 9 to 5, Sometimes feel sluggish in the afternoon. How do I maintain my focus that is usually high in the morning all the way to 4 to 5 p.m.? Supplements. No, you should not look for supplements. Not for that specific case. Your body is telling you something. I mean, the supplements, all they will do is mask the fatigue. Uh, and it's like taking a painkiller when you have a bum shoulder. You don't feel the pain, so you do exercises that will scrap your shoulder even more. Same thing here. If you are super tired, then maybe it's just not the time to train hard. Either decrease your lifting frequency or train at a time where you are no longer fatigued. I do not like evening training. The main reason is, as you just mentioned, after a long day, very few people can actually muster great workouts. You will be drained, and training while drained will just drain you even more. Furthermore, just to be able to survive the workout, the body will overproduce cortisol, overproduce adrenaline to get you amped up. But then you go home at like 7, and you just cannot calm yourself down from the workout. So that is a very bad time to train. So what I would recommend is try to find a different time to train, either during your lunch break or during early in the morning. I personally often train at something like 8. Some in the past, when I was doing lots of personal coaching, personal training, I was sometimes coaching as many as 60 hours a week. I would train at 5 a.m. I remember like vividly my partner and I doing snatches at 5 a.m. in a gym. Okay? It does require an adaptation period, but that's what you have to do because relying on supplements to get through a workout when your body is telling you that you're not in a proper level of fatigue or neurological capacity will just backfire. The way I can explain it is let's say you're taking a stimulant to be able to work out when your body is clearly telling you not to work out. It's like going to the bank and taking a big ass loan. Fun, that's fun. You have lots of money, you can buy stuff, but eventually you will need to reimburse it with interest. Same thing happens. It masks fatigue. It doesn't mean the fatigue is no longer there. That's a bad answer. You probably hate my answer, but that is my answer. Train at a time where you're not fatigued or reduce the number of training sessions you're doing. For example, if you're not working on the weekend, you can have like 2 sessions there right from the start. You can have a session on Monday or Tuesday because it's early in the week. You have not built a lot of fatigue. That can be like right away for workouts there, and then you have more rest periods during the week. I don't know, but try to train when the body feels rested. To me, that the best solution is just building up the discipline and structure to train early in the morning. It does require some adaptation, but it's doable. Or worst case scenario, at lunch break. Cortisol are highest in the morning. If you do intermittent fasting and need the first meal, okay. Have you ever seen me pissed off? Because if you haven't, your question will get me pissed off. Okay, I'm going to tell you why. Cortisol level are highest in the morning if you do intermittent fasting and eat the first meal at 11 a.m. That is not intermittent fasting. It's called skipping breakfast. People have been doing that for years and it doesn't work. That's not what intermittent fasting is. That's the easy way of people to believe they're doing intermittent fasting. They think I need 16 hours of fasting and 8 hours of eating. So they will eat, for example, from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. 8 hours of eating. I'm intermittent fasting. No, you're not. No, you are not. That you're just doing what 90% of the obese population is doing. Okay, you're skipping breakfast. That's it. Okay, uh, the 16-8 rule is not 16 hours of not eating. It's 16 hours of fasting, being in a fasted state. Fasted means there are no nutrients available in your bloodstream or in your stomach. If you are eating your last meal at 7 p.m., at 7:01, you're not fasted. At 8, you're not fasted. At 9, you're not fasted. It requires at least 3 hours, probably even a lot more, to digest your last meal, especially if you binged out, like most people who pretend to do intermittent fasting are doing. That's just stupid. That's stupid. At best, it gives you something like 10 hours of fasting. But you know what? Most of that is spent while you're sleeping. Sleeping, the hours you spend fasted while you're asleep is half as effective as the time you spend fasting while awake. The reason is that the main impact of fasting created, like which will create autophagy when all that stuff happens when you have a large deficit in calories. So you are forced to increase an enzyme called AMPK, which will mobilize fuel and will also create that autophagy that most people who are fasting love, okay, or love to talk about. And when you are physically active, you are spending a lot more fuel than when you are asleep. So fasting when you are active is a lot more effective than fasting when you're sleeping. Okay, so if you are eating from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., like most people who pretend to do intermittent fasting because it's cool and now I can eat whatever the fuck I want. Okay, sorry for that. Okay, that just pisses me off. You're basically doing lots of harm to your body because you have essentially something like 5 hours of fasting when you're awake, where you actually want closer to 8, 10, 12. Okay, true intermittent fasting goes with the cycle of the body. The body is the natural cycle is during the day you are physically active. You need to be neurologically amped up, and consuming too much food in that part can actually have a sedative effect. So if you are to use intermittent fasting, you should use the true intermittent fasting strategy, which was detailed in T Nation like 20 years ago in an article called "The Warrior's Diet," which essentially mimics what Muslims do during Ramadan. You are eating when the sun sets at sundown, so you are not eating from sunset to sundown. Okay, the difference is that with intermittent fasting, you can actually drink, uh, and that will give you. Let's say you are, for example, you wake up at 6, and you're going to be eating at let's say 7. That gives you 13 hours of fasting while you are awake, and probably 2 or 3 more or 5 more when you are sleeping. Okay, eating from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. is not intermittent fasting. It's what 90% of the obese population are going to be skipping breakfast and you have a fucking dinner and then that does not work. That pisses me off. I hate your question. Anyway, let's see if it gets better from here. Sorry about that. Should you worry about eating a little something to deplete the cortisol peak or any other way to cut a possible cortisol? You don't want to cut a morning cortisol peak. You actually need cortisol in the morning to get started. That's actually what wakes you up in the morning. Cortisol will increase the conversion of noradrenaline into adrenaline, amping you up, giving you energy. A lot of people who actually do true intermittent fasting, not the really bad version you word about, which is essentially just skipping breakfast and doesn't work. Those who actually do real intermittent fasting are always shocked that I do. I'm not eating and I'm full of energy. Of course, because when you're fasting, you have more cortisol, which increases adrenaline, so you're amped up. That's why I do intermittent fasting when I give a seminar, so that I have more energy. Okay, but I don't do that stupid version you mentioned. In the morning, you don't want to reduce cortisol. You want to reduce cortisol in the evening because reducing cortisol, you clearly don't understand what it does. Okay? Clearly, you're still probably like, oh, cortisol will break my muscle, bro. That's not what it does. Cortisol is not a self-destruct hormone. Okay, learn your physiology. That's just not what it does. Go on, like, do yourself a service. Go on Testosterone Nation or Nation.com and look for my article called "The Best Damn Cortisol Article Ever." I explain all the function of cortisol, and you'll see that if you're active during the day, either intellectually or physically, and you blunt cortisol, you just can't function. You can't. Okay? You can't. You want cortisol low in the evening to enter what is called the rest and relax state, rest and recover state. But during the day, if you inhibit cortisol, you just can't function. You'll be a larva. Next. Since this channel is named Teenage, what is the best thing to increase testosterone level? Not be in a deficit, not overtrain, sleep properly. That's it. Did you put up the Christmas decorations yourself? It's not even December yet. Yeah, I told my wife that for every day that the Christmas decorations go up before December, Santa kills the reindeer. She didn't listen. It's like she's like super into the Christmas spirit. I'm not. I'm really not a holiday kind of guy. All right. I see. What would be your best approach for lifters who work on night shift to optimize gains? Well, if you are always working on night shifts, that's a bit less bad than if you're working on rotating shifts. For example, sometimes you do night shifts, sometimes you do day shifts, and so on and so forth, because that would actually require you to change your circadian rhythm. So if you always work at the same time, even though it's night, you can have a pretty regular eating schedule. Many gyms are open 24/7, so you can actually plan your day just like a regular day, but you have like 8 to 12 hours later, for example. One thing I might recommend, because the biggest issue with um, night shift is that oftentimes you don't see the light, the sun, until when it's time to go to bed. And that can mess you up neurologically. It's called Zeitgebers. It's external signs that trigger internal processes. So you actually want to see sunlight when you wake up, when your day starts, to initiate the whole circadian rhythm thing. So if the sun is down when you wake up, what you could be doing is invest in a small infrared light, and you just stare at it for like 10, 15 minutes when you wake up. It will have the same effect as looking at the sun in the morning. It will initiate your circadian rhythm, and you will be better off with your day. But other than that, it's just follow a regular training or eating schedule. If it's, you always work on night shift, then it's just like a regular day, but at different times. It's really the sunlight and sunset that would be issue. All right, guys, we're up for today. Thank you for your questions, except for the intermittent fasting one. So I hope to see you next week. Again, tell your friends, because the more questions we have, the less intermittent fasting questions I have to answer, the more happy I am. So thank you for being here, and you guys have a great week.